Okay, so in the last two videos, we used examples involving modus ponens. In this video, we're going to use an example involving modus tollens. Argument will be a little more serious. It's going to be an example from philosophy of religion. It'll be an atheistic argument. So it'll be an argument that God does not exist. You'll do more practice exercises that'll involve both pro and anti-God arguments. Okay, so let's think about this. Sometimes this is something that leads people to believe that there is no God. If something really bad happens that seems totally purposeless and senseless. It's not, there are a lot of bad things in the world, and they don't really cause people to become atheists. It's bad things that seem just pointless or senseless. And now, if somebody's, and then that leads them to go, okay, there is no God. Now, if people are dramatic, they'll say nothing happens for a reason, or all of life is pointless, therefore there is no God. That's a little bit dramatic. I think you can make, maybe instead, rather than saying nothing is purposeful or meaningful, they'll just say not everything is purposeful or meaningful. Or they'll just say not everything has a reason for why it happens. And that's enough to lead them toward atheism. Okay. So I've been describing this informally, but let's kind of write it a little more clearly. So somebody might say something senseless happens or pointless, and they say not everything happens for a reason. And then they conclude there is no God. Okay. Now, as it stands though, this argument is not deductively valid. We need something to help connect this premise to the conclusion. How are we going to do that? You can do it by adding a premise and making this into a modus tollens argument. Okay? So if you want to try on your own, you can pause and see if you can add a premise to make this into a modus tollens argument. At any point, if you feel like you know how to do it, pause and try to do it on your own. It's always good if you can figure things out. Okay, but if you feel like you can't get it, then just keep following along with me. So I already gave you a hint. This argument is going to be modus tollens. So let's remind ourselves what modus tollens looks like. It goes, if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. Okay, there's another hint. So if you want to pause now and see if you can finish this premise, then go ahead. If not, keep following along. Okay, what do we know now? Well, not P is saying there is no God. What does that mean P is? That means P says there is a God. Okay? Not Q is not everything happens for a reason. What does that make Q? Everything happens for a reason. Now we know our P and Q, so we can fill in our missing blank. Premise 1. It's a little harder because I have to write up here, but so if P then Q, so if there is a God, if there is a God, then what? Q, everything happens for a reason. Okay. If there is a God, then everything happens for a reason. Not everything happens for a reason, therefore there is no God. There we go. Now what we've given is we've given the atheist a valid argument because this is modus tollens. MT. So we got a valid modus tollens argument. And okay, now go back and remember this is from a recent lesson, are two important points about deductive arguments. Okay, try to remember two important points about deductive arguments. the first one, I'm not going to write it all out. The first important argument point was, if you believe the premises of an argument are true, and if you think that the argument's valid, then you should believe the conclusion. Okay, so suppose right now you're a believer in God, okay? But you think, if there is a God, if there were a God, a perfect God, an ultimate being, then everything would happen for a reason. So if you agree with premise one, and you also agree that not everything happens for a reason, like certain bad things, then you shouldn't be a believer in God anymore. You should conclude from these premises that there is no God. Conclusion. So if you now does that follow? Well, ask yourself that. Now you should believe that the argument is valid because it's modus tollens. So then you should ask whether you believe both premises are true. That's what you should do. And if you do, then you should believe there's no God. Now, some of you might be believers in God, and you might be like, I'm not ready to give up my belief in God yet. Okay. And then remember that there's two ways to attack an argument. Okay. What are those two ways? You attack either the validity of the argument or the truth of the premises. Okay, those are the two ways to attack an argument. Now, step two. Now, again, we already know this argument's valid. It's modus tollens, so there's no question about that. So what that means is we should see, if you're a believer in God who wants to hold on to your belief, then you should see which of these premises is less plausible. Okay. You might say, well, even if there is a God, maybe God allows some things to happen by chance. Okay, maybe that's hard. If we're meaning like a capital G God that like is all powerful, all knowing, it's a little bit harder to hold that. But maybe that's the way you might want to go intellectually. Or you could attack premise two and try to argue maybe everything does happen for a reason. Now, here's something that's interesting. If you're an atheist trying to convince a believer, you might convince some, you might not convince others, but here's some value even for the believer in God, the theist. Okay, initially you might not have seen the connection between these three propositions, but once you realize, okay, I do believe in God and I do believe in premise one, then you have to reject premise two. Okay, you got to attack one of the premises. But what that's going to do as a believer in God is it's going to lead you to think, oh, that means if I deny premise two, I have to think that everything does happen for a reason. Wow, that's interesting. Like everything happens for a reason, even the things that don't seem to make sense. That's interesting too, right? So there's various ways you can go. You can conclude atheism, become an atheist, or you can conclude that some things everything does happen for a reason, or you could think that even if there is a God, some things just don't have a reason. What we've done though is we clarified our thinking. We've clarified the logic, and that's the value of critical thinking. Okay, so that's what we've done here is with modus tollens. In the Zoom session, we're going to learn how to construct arguments beyond just modus tollens. We're going to use other argument forms. Where you get the argument form, you just get one premise, one conclusion, and then you have to fill in the other premise. So that's what we'll do in the Zoom, and that's where we'll end right now. So see you guys in a little bit. Okay, goodbye.